What up? It is Brian the Illustrator, and I'm back again to break down another graphic for you guys. And today, we're talking about the dirtiest word in t-shirts. I'm talking about bootlegs. I don't get offended when people ask me to make a bootleg. A lot of my clients kind of come to me like they're asking a stranger to buy them drugs, and they're like, look, we would like for you, okay, to make us something, and we don't have a license for this team, but we do sell. And I'm just like, just say you want a bootleg, it's fine. I think the politically correct term for it is a non-licensed professional sports graphic. Also works the same way for collegiate. I don't mind saying that I make bootleg tees. Like, it's not a big deal to me. When I worked at Tailgate, for those of you guys who didn't see my first video, for about 8 years, I worked at a company called Tailgate Clothing doing vintage college tees primarily. We did a lot of other stuff too, but college was kind of our bread and butter. And one of the things that I did while I was there was I ran our licensing for a while the woman who ordinarily ran our licensing was on a maternity leave. So for a few months, I was the one putting all of our graphics through different portals to get approved by different companies and licensing departments, and working with, if they had problems with what we did, making the modifications to make them work legally, all of that. Part of what we did when I was at Tailgate was we'd have what they called an art slick. That was every logo that was approved for whatever property we were working with, and then also a list of all of their trademark verbiage. And one of the things I kind of came to understand is trademarks with apparel are not as specific as you might think. Actually reverse that. They're not as broad as you might think. So the example that I always give to my clients is you have Tigers at Grambling and LSU and Clemson and Memphis, and then you go to the pros and you have the Detroit Tigers. Tigers are every fucking where. It's not a rare, mascot to have a tiger as your mascot. There's a reason that LSU and Grambling, which are both in Louisiana, can have trademarks on tigers and not violate the other one's copyright. All right, so you want to be kind of cognizant of how those licenses work so that you don't get in trouble, you don't get sued. I've done this for a long time. I've never had a client even receive a cease and desist letter, because I know what I'm doing. I know how to do it in a way that's not going to get them in trouble. So with apparel, if you have a trademark on something, it's usually pretty specific, because the idea is you cannot use that verbiage in a way that's going to confuse the consumer to think that this is a licensed graphic. So the example that I would give with the Tigers is, if I am selling a t-shirt that is purple with yellow text and says Tigers on it, LSU's going to come for me and they're going to say you're violating our copyright for sure. If I do the same shirt and it is on, royal blue, and the graphic is in, let's say, like a bright yellow, no one's going to come for me, because even Memphis doesn't have blue and bright yellow as their colorway, right? So you can kind of fudge it a little bit that way. The best way that I'll do it, and I'll give some examples here in a minute, nobody has a trademark on the name of a city, unless you're talking about college, and it's like, again, Clemson would have a trademark on Clemson, for example. But if you are doing a big city, that's got professional sports teams in it, none of those teams have a trademark on the name of the city, because that's way too broad, because they're going to be swapping up all kinds of stuff. Another good example is the Dallas Cowboys. Their logo is literally a 5-pointed star. They do own a trademark on a 5-pointed star. You can still use 5-pointed stars in all kinds of graphics, not violate the trademark. Word to Converse, which also has a 5-pointed star as their logo. So there's ways to do this and not wind up getting yourself in trouble, getting your clients in trouble. I want to kind of break down some of what I do on some of my other non-licensed sports graphics that I've done in the past. And then I'm going to take you guys through one that I just did for my brand, Nifty 50 Apparel, that is a bootleg Boston Red Sox graphic. It's not going to violate their copyright. We're not going to get in any trouble for making this thing, but yet if you are a Boston Red Sox fan, you're going to recognize it right away and understand what we're talking about with this graphic. So if you guys like what I do, make sure you subscribe to my channel. I'll keep on breaking down more graphics and taking you through my process some more. Also, if you like this graphic and you own a company that makes graphic tees. You can get at me at Brian Thomas Crooks LLC at Gmail. The graphic I'm going to do right now is going to be one of the wholesale graphics that I do for Nifty 50. So if you are a Boston, clothing store, you want to have this shirt in your store, in your assortment, you can get at me at nifty50apparel at gmail.com. That's nifty50apparel at gmail.com. And then also we're going to sell this one through our website as well at nifty50apparel.com. So stay tuned. I'm going to break down some of what I've done in the past on some of my other bootleg graphics, and then we're going to get started on my process. I'll kind of take you through not only the steps that I do to make the graphic, but also some of the things that I have in my system that speed this process up a whole lot and that make making these graphics go a little bit easier, go a little bit smoother for me, and hopefully you guys like how it turns out. So I wanted to go ahead and take you through some of the other bootlegs I've done in the past. This one is obviously a Detroit Lions graphic. No one has a trademark on the word Detroit, and so you can go ahead and put Detroit with a lion that I created my own illustration of, put football with that. This is clearly the Detroit Lions graphic. One of the other things that I wanted to show on this one is how I do my backgrounds on a lot of these. You can just do a stroke around the graphic if you like. A lot of people do that to kind of differentiate it for having, a color that drops to the ground color of the shirt so the graphic shows up. I always offset it a little bit because if it's been, printed a long time ago, sometimes it makes what's called a registration error where the things don't line up perfectly when you lay the screens down. And I think offsetting the background on it a little bit really adds a little bit of authenticity that may not come to mind right away when you first see it, but I think it does make the graphic look a lot more interesting and a little bit cooler if you don't have it be perfectly lined up exactly the way that, digitally it would be on the screen. Here we have another Detroit graphic. This is for the Detroit Pistons, obviously. A little bit trickier when you don't have an animal as a mascot. Trying to come up with a creative way to do Pistons. Not the most, visibly recognizable thing if you're not a Pistons fan, but, adding the two Pistons kind of pumping out of the ball, I thought worked out pretty well for this one. Yet again, no one has a trademark on the word Detroit, so you can go ahead and do something like this and not wind up getting in trouble. Another Detroit graphic. If you guys notice, a lot of our stuff is Detroit. My production partner, Gabe, is a Michigan native, a Detroit guy, and so we do a lot of Detroit stuff. I think mostly because that's where he's from, and it kind of strikes a chord with him. But on this one, again, a little bit trickier to come up with something interesting that's going to say Detroit Red Wings and not wind up getting us in trouble. Always harder if you don't have an animal to work off of. Animals are super easy for mascots. This one took a little bit more thought. I often pop in the year a team was founded if it kind of helps to fill the graphic out some. But go ahead and put some Red Wings and a tire, and this to me, if you are a Detroit Red Wings fan, instantly recognizable without winding up getting you in any kind of trouble. Here's where things get super easy. A tiger is really, really easy to do. In my system, I've got decals, I've got t-shirts, I've got yearbooks, I've got all kinds of authentic things going back 60, 70, 80 years that have really great mascot illustrations that you can always repurpose and reuse for different things down the line. So for this one, I think this tiger might have originally been a Kentucky Wildcat decal from the 1950s, maybe early 60s, that I repurposed, recolored up to be a tiger, dropped that right on top of that baseball diamond. Stars are always kind of a neat way to fill in a lot of space. If you have kind of an empty looking graphic, vintage stuff with stars and sports go really well together. And then that typeface is one that's called patched. I use that all the time for baseball stuff. It screams baseball to me. At Nifty 50, this is one of our hotter sellers, and so I think this is a super successful way to make a non-licensed, bootleg of a Detroit Tigers baseball graphic. Here again, we've repurposed this lion here for another Detroit Lions graphic. I'm pretty sure this one came from a Columbia University decal from way back in the day. Looks very 30s, 40s to me. I need to go back and check the year on that, but this is a very old decal that Columbia had a long time ago. repurposed it, recolored it up. I'll do a video later on. Maybe the next one will show you guys taking an old decal or an old image from a yearbook and turning it into a new graphic. But again, no one holds a trademark on the word Detroit. No one holds a trademark on the letter D, and so this one works super well and definitely communicates that it's a Detroit Lions graphic without winding up getting us in any kind of trouble. I mentioned a minute ago that Gabe is a Detroit guy. I am a Chicago guy. Chicago is hometown for me. My accent isn't strong, so you can't really pick up on it, although I do have a pretty solid sibilant S. You'll hear a lot of the time when I talk. Chicago's home for me. And so this one, I think, originally came from maybe a Cornell big red decal from way back when. Took a long time to do all the fur details and all that sort of thing on there. It's not easy to repurpose old stuff and turn it into something new. Dropping that white circle behind him is kind of a nod to a lot of old graphics from the 30s and 40s, same as that sailor hat he has on. You see that all the time with really old mascots, and so sometimes I will take something older, modify it, that C was not part of the graphic originally, and kind of rework some things so I'm not just ripping something old and making it new, but putting a little bit of a spin on it. If you're from Chicago, you'll recognize the 4 stars on the hat. But yeah, this is a non-licensed Bears graphic that I think communicates pretty well. You can't always find something old on a decal or a yearbook. I bring up yearbooks a lot because they're a great source for one-off illustrations of mascots from a very long time ago. Same with game programs. I've got a whole library full of all kinds of game programs that I can use to take, a one-time illustration of a mascot and, use as a base for a new graphic. Sometimes you have to use a photo, and so this was originally a photograph. Whenever possible, I like to get stock images that I will, buy because I'm not trying to steal from any kind of photographer and use their work to make my graphic without attribution. So I use Shutterstock for all of my stock photos, and then I'll build the illustration off of that. So I will also do a video later on showing you guys how to turn a photograph into a cool vintage decal or vintage graphic as well. With this one, obviously, New England Patriots. The colorway is right there. The star on the hat is from their current mascot logo that they have. But really, anytime I can do the exploding stars, I think that's a kind of a neat motif that, fills in the space pretty well. New England, a little bit of an off-balanced 2-word combination, and so adding in the stars fills out the graphic a whole lot and makes the whole thing look a lot more dynamic. One more thing you also see again, that when I do my stroke, it's not perfectly aligned. I offset it a tiny bit, just makes it look a little bit more authentic and not like it's something that was digitally created in 2025. Errors happen all the time in printing, especially way back when, and when you're doing a lot of graphics quickly, your screens can get a little bit screwed up. I think it always makes the graphic look a little bit more interesting if you do it that way. So let's start building this graphic. I actually have an archive for all of my different sports imagery that I use all the time. That way I'm not having to go and create something brand new, a different baseball, a different football every time I want to make a graphic. This saves me a ton of time just to have them all grouped together. We're doing a baseball graphic here. I kind of have to pick which baseball I want to go with, and I think this is the one that I like for this graphic. It's simple, it's bold, it's not going to overpower everything to have it in the graphic. Another way to make graphics that are not going to get you in trouble is to find something really interesting about the team that their fans are going to resonate with. I know that for the Red Sox, they have a song that has the chorus, "I love that dirty water." They play that at their games. I don't want to do Sweet Caroline. Everyone's already done that already. So I'm going to go with "I love that dirty water" for this graphic. I've got another archive of all of my athletic typefaces. I use a few of them kind of over and over again, depending whether they want a serif or a sans serif. This one is SF Collegiate. Again, you want to adjust your kerning to make sure everything looks quite right. You see how tight that A is next to the H. You want to make sure things are balanced before you go ahead and build the rest of your graphic around that part of it here. And in this case, I'm going to use a script and pair it with that. I've got a whole archive of all of my script typefaces. I have them set up alphabetically. I know which ones have numbers associated because a lot of them don't, which ones have exclamation marks, all of those things. Blackjack is my favorite one to use for vintage baseball stuff. It has that, I don't even know what you would call it, those little points on each of the letter forms. I love how that looks. It looks very baseball to me. I pair it with patched all the time, which we guys saw earlier on. But I'm going to go ahead and use that one for the dirty water part, and I'm going to take you through how I do a lot of my script typefaces here in a sec. As you see here, there's no exclamation mark with this typeface. I'm going to build one anyway. I could have just used that one. It would have looked okay. Instead, I see how the T looks on there. I'm going to turn that T into an exclamation mark when I go ahead and build the rest of the graphic. It looks like Watert or Watent right now because that R is a little bit wonky a little bit. But I want to line things up, in a way that's going to make some sense. I have an idea as I look at these of a way to ligature that Y with the uppercase W. And so I'm going to line it up like that. I'm going to go ahead and outline my type here. Then I'm going to cut that T and kind of take out some of the anchor points and some of some of the vector, then cut it to make that into an exclamation mark, so it's going to match the rest of the typeface without kind of standing out as from a whole different font family here. Blackjack, like a lot of script typefaces, is italicized a little bit. Having that perfect circle there isn't going to match the rest of the angle, so I skew it a little bit so that it kind of looks like it was always there and not going to stand out as a part that looks incongruous with the rest of the graphic. Next, we're going to build a tail. Scripts and tails, very baseball. There's a couple different ways to do tails. Some of them have that curve down. Some of them are kind of straight across the bottom. For this one, I like this, where it kind of curves in from both right and left. But I always lay out the tail to kind of end where I want it to end. I always extend it way far to the right, so I have plenty of space to build the ligature with the letter before. If you guys watched my previous video, you understand that I usually will trace anything that I'm tracing in a very bright magenta. It is a color I would never use in a graphic, so when I see it, I know it stands out. It's easier for me to visualize and to see where I'm putting all of my lines if I have it that way instead of a color that I'm going to use all over the place in the graphic. Let's speed things up a little bit here as I do my tracing. I explained before that I trace all of my text by hand. That way, not only is it going to look more authentically vintage to have those rounded corners, those wobbly edges, it also gives me the ability to fix some things. I don't love the R in this typeface, so I fixed the R on it. I'm going to ligature together, like I said, that Y and the W. You can't do all those things digitally. Now this part is where I'm going to show you guys how I actually build the tail onto the rest of the typeface here. There's a couple different ways to do your tails. You can do a low kind of an angle on it, which is how I'm going to show you guys here to build that ligature onto the tail. It works sometimes. It depends on how the rest of the letter form looks. But the low one, I don't love how it works with Blackjack. I don't think it looks especially sporty. But I'll show you guys how I would do a low, kind of a rounded version of the ligature for the tail first, and then I'll take you through the way that I'm going to do it, which works a little bit more for baseball. So you're going to kind of build it low, nice gentle curve right down into the tail. Start with the bottom, go back up to the top. You want to kind of keep your width of that space roughly consistent until you get down to the tail part. To me, that looks a little bit wimpy for Blackjack. It's a little bit not quite aggressive enough. So instead, I'm going to build this really high arching, tight tail ligature on here. Then I'm going to go ahead, once I have the top part of it set, come back again. And then this part's going to get a lot thicker, as you see when it gets tight there. Makes the shape look more dynamic, matches the type form a lot better, and then right back down into that tail. Let's speed things back up again now. I've mentioned before that sometimes when the traces come together, the lines don't quite match up. You get some weird bumps. This is just me fixing a little bit of a rough kind of a meet between my lines there. I didn't love how it looked, and so I had to come back and add some patches to it. But at this point, the letters are all done. I'm going to go ahead and build in that exclamation mark last here, and then we're going to go ahead and finish up the rest of the type. I mentioned last video that I have a shortcut for what I do to turn my illustrations from stroke into the actual solid vector. I want to break down the individual steps. So the first thing I do, it's built for turning type into solid vector. First thing I do is outline the type. Then I will outline the stroke, turn that into solid shape with Pathfinder. So I merge all that together. I add a layer behind that. I trim that in Pathfinder, and then I go ahead and merge that back together to make one solid vector. Just, having the shortcut saves me, I don't know, maybe 20 seconds. It doesn't save a whole lot of time, but it is a whole lot faster than individually going through and doing that, step by step each time. I just build my shortcut, Shift Command F5, and it takes care of the whole thing for me at one time. So at this point, the text is done. I had what I thought was going to be a great working idea for how this graphic was all going to work together. As you'll see, sometimes in graphic design, things don't go according to plan. You have a vision before you start the graphic. You think it's going to work out great. I put this thing on there and I'm like, you can't see the baseball enough. It's not going to work the way that I intended it to. So I got to change directions a little bit. I like to keep, multiple different copies and different versions of things. So instead of deleting it, I'm just going to take the individual pieces I want to work with instead and repurpose those, shift them over to the right. So I have the original one still, and now I can work on this version of it in case that also doesn't work out and I want to go back to the original. I'm actually going to switch up my typeface here. This one is LHF. I like this one a lot. It's a little bit taller than the SF Collegiate, but LHF for me has a little more character. The type is a little bit taller. I had to rematch it up with the skewed angle because I didn't do it all at once as I built this part in later. The way I do that is kind of put everything on the same baseline, skew it. As you can see here, it's not quite right, which I fix a little bit later on. But now I'm kind of shifting directions and saying, okay, well, now how am I going to make this work since the original idea that I had didn't really come together the way that I intended? Now here I'm going to go ahead and build in the stroke. I talked about the stroke earlier on, how I don't always have it perfectly set up. The problem with stroke is it's going to always round off everything. Stroke is not a perfect tool, but it gives me a guide, and since I do my text by hand anyway, all I need is kind of a baseline and a guide to work off of for what I'm going to do here. A lot of the time you can just do a stroke. In this case, I'm going to blend the stroke and kind of make it into a drop shadow as well. Just kind of adds a little bit more interest to the overall graphic, and then also it's going to give me that ability to skew it a little bit off center so it's not quite perfect, but I'm going to go ahead and put a stroke behind the whole thing and then move it around a little bit so it's not quite perfect. Then I'm going to retrace that so that I can add in those points again and not have it be quite so bubbly in the sharper points of it. Remove the type around a little bit, skew it a little bit. This looks almost right, but I keep on thinking I got to find a better way to make that top line of the type work. So I mess around with that a little bit, and now we're going to go ahead and retrace some more text and retrace that stroke and kind of get to the end of finishing this graphic off. Might be wondering why I'm not finishing the whole letter at one time. There's kind of two reasons for it. Number one, I'm doing this on a Huion Canvas illustration tablet. I can't always see where my hand is going to be. My hand's blocking part of my vision. More importantly, and I don't know why this is, if somebody can get at me and let me know, Illustrator times out how long you can be using the brush tool. I don't know why it does that. It pisses me off. Sometimes it's longer, sometimes it's shorter, but it runs out of time. It's it times out with how long you can actually be making your vector with the brush tool, and so I have to stop in the middle so I don't wind up having the line that I'm tracing end right on the edge, and then I have to work really hard to match it up properly. I always want to start and finish the line inside of the shape so that I get those smooth edges on the outside and don't have any weird parts that are kind of poking out at me. Now here I'm going to go ahead and fix a lot of the quirks that come with using stroke by itself. As you saw on that first kind of point, it gets really rounded. You see here on the bottom of the tail too. Look how sharp the edge of that tail is, the point, and then how rounded off it gets when you turn it into a stroke. Just a quirk of how the program works. It always bugs me, and so I always find myself coming back through and tightening up those points so that it looks more like it matches the text underneath and doesn't get really bubbly and loose looking. Depending on what graphic I'm working on, sometimes I trim up the inside as well, where there's what they call counters inside of the stroke. Sometimes I will cut those out. On this one, I'm going to leave them there. I kind of call this like a sticker backing kind of a look to it, where instead of me, keeping fidelity to the letter form and doing the inside and the outside of the letter as a stroke, I'm just doing the outside of the whole thing. It's going to be a big kind of like a stamp behind the whole graphic instead of me going through and cutting out the insides. There's not a real reason for that. As a matter of fact, when you see the finished product of this and I show you guys on the thumbnail for this graphic, I actually do this some more. When I thought I was done, I took a look at it when I photoshopped it onto the shirt, and where that D and the W come together, it's a little, I don't like that gap there at all, and so I actually fill that space in as well. There's not a rhyme or reason for it. It's just sometimes I like how it looks better if you have a solid, stamp behind the whole graphic instead of tracing the inside of where the letters are empty. Those are called counters. Sometimes I like it that way. It really just kind of depends on my mood at the time. I wish I had a better explanation. I don't. And here you see I'm getting that solid stamp behind the whole graphic, and you can see where the D and the W, I can't stand how empty it is in the middle there. So when it's all said and done, I look at it again, I fill that space in. But essentially the graphic is done now. It's all good to go. A little bit of fine tuning here and there. I'm going to go ahead and drop that behind my weathering layer. Measure it to be 11 inches across. Get rid of all the extra stuff on the side. Drop it behind the weathering layer. Bring it all together. I don't know what color I want this on. I don't know if I want it on red, if I want it on navy blue, and so I'm going to color it up a couple of different ways to give myself a couple of options. I think in the end, I like this best on red. And so when you see the thumbnail of the graphic, it is going to be on red, but I give myself the option. I also made a version of this that's going to go on a neutral ground, like on a gray heather or on white. That way, whether we want to print it on red, white, blue, or gray heather, we have options that are going to work kind of across the board for that. There you have it. We are all done with this Boston Red Sox I Love That Dirty Water graphic. If you are a t-shirt shop in Boston and you want to add this into your assortment, you can get in touch with me at nifty50apparel@gmail.com. That's nifty50apparel@gmail. Keep an eye out for this one on our website, nifty50apparel.com. If you like my work and you want me to make something bespoke for your shop or for your application, I can do sports, I can do food, local stuff, text, kind of whatever you want. I can turn that into a vintage looking t-shirt graphic, so you can get in touch with me there at brianthomascrooksllc@gmail.com. Go ahead and subscribe to my channel if you like what I work on. The next one I'm going to do is going to be a Detroit Tigers graphic. I'm going to build off of an old decal that I think I have a Missouri version of. It might be Northwestern. It might be Kentucky. There's a lot of different versions of this thing that's been out there from back in the 30s. It's a really simple kind of a cat tiger illustration that I'm going to show you guys how I repurpose an old image into something brand new, and that'll be in our next video, so stay tuned for that, and I will see you guys next time.